This is Ancient Faith Today with Father Tom Soroka, a weekly live call-in show addressing the issues of our day from a distinctly Orthodox perspective. You can join the conversation by calling in at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Father Tom is the priest at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and welcomes guests from across the globe to discuss important topics of interest. Here's Father Tom.
Welcome to Ancient Faith Today. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. We'll be taking your calls in a bit at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. John Maddox will be answering your calls tonight, so please make sure to turn the show volume off before you come on air. To participate online, we encourage you to go either to the AFM Facebook page at facebook.com/Ancient Faith Ministries and place a question there in the thread for tonight's show where it is being live simulcast, or you can also go to facebook.com/Ancient Faith Today and place a question there in the thread for tonight's show. You can even send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com. So let's get started. The land of Ireland is fascinating. Its geographical beauty, the beauty of its people, and its culture have made Ireland an endlessly fascinating place for people around the world. Here in the United States, those who claim Irish heritage are a major part of the landscape. Historically, in the 1840s, Irish people constituted nearly half of all the immigrants to this nation due to Ireland's potato blight in 1845, where almost 1 million people died in a devastating famine. Today, 1 in 10 people in the United States are of Irish heritage. But even more fascinating is the fact that Ireland is deeply Christian and has an ancient Christian history. Christianity existed in Ireland from the early 5th century, if not earlier. The city of Old Rome sent the first Christian bishop, St. Palladius, in 431 AD. Soon after, we have the missionary work of the most famous Irish saint, St. Patrick, and later on we have such giants as St. Finian, St. Brendan, and St. Columba. These saints had been, unfortunately, largely ignored in Orthodox piety until recently. But with the advent of so many people of Western heritage embracing the fullness of the Orthodox faith, the interest in the hagiographies and the history of Orthodoxy in the West, that is, of the undivided church before the Great Schism between Old Rome and the other 4 centers of Christianity, has increased exponentially. Recently, even the Russian Orthodox Church added numerous Western saints to their calendar. And so with that, we're honored to have back on the show my dear friend, Father Michael Carney, a priest of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. He's the rector of St. Herman Orthodox Church in Lake Odessa, Michigan, and he recently made a pilgrimage to the holy sites in the land of Ireland. And he's going to share his reflections about his experience as an Orthodox priest, walking in the footsteps of these venerable Irish saints. So, Father Michael, welcome back to Ancient Faith Today. John, I think we don't have Father Michael there. John, are you there?
Yes, I just heard him, Father. Father Michael, are you there?
It looks like he's not on the lines.
Well, he's on. He's on our
listed.
Opal link.
Oh, yes?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Father Michael?
Father Michael.
Well, if you can hear us, Father Michael, call us back on the phone, and we'll get you
Yeah,
right
give
in.
us a call. Sorry about that, folks. So while we're getting Father Michael somewhere, either on the phone or we'll try our best to get a hold of him. You know, what's fascinating, I think, about this trip, Father Michael was explaining to me that he had walked in these really lush places that these ancient Orthodox saints had actually walked. And he's going to tell us, I think he's calling in now, he's going to tell us. Father Michael, are you there?
I am. Okay, good.
I was
Sorry about that. I am like I somehow need to get into the 20th century at least, because I'm so far behind with technology. It's probably my fault. Anyway, first thing I want to say is a slight correction. My full name is Michael Joseph Francis Patrick Carney, so you can tell.
I wondered.
I'm a convert from like Polish Catholicism, but
that was actually my first question to you, and that is, you grew up as an Irish Catholic, and I wanted to ask you
equal weight on both words. Equal weight. Yeah.
That's exactly what I was asking. The idea that you were Irish. How important was that to you growing up? And also, I'm not sure this is relevant, but were you Irish on both sides of your family?
Not entirely on my mother's side, but
okay.
But very much on my father's side, and to some extent also my mother's side. So yes,
got it.
And so it was very much a cultural identity, and that was strengthened in me as a young man when I went to seminary and joined, of course, the Irish Carmelites. What are your options, right? So I grew up with that. I played in what they call nowadays a trad band, an Irish traditional music band, when I was younger. So that was very much a part of my heritage. And when I became Orthodox, and how that all happened, that's another story. But when I became Orthodox, there was a young fellow at seminary at St. Vlad's who was Russian, and he'd gone to the Antiochians, and he said, "It's ethnicity is something generic. You can sort of trade it." So I thought, okay, I'm just sort of trading my tribal feathers for another, and I tried for quite a long time to be a Russian. Perhaps some of my listeners have tried that. I ultimately found out that not even God can save an imaginary Russian. I had to be who I was, right? So Orthodoxy, and I never looked back. I was so grateful to become Orthodox. But there was also a sense of a break with my own, ethnicity. And so that was kind of weighing on me in some ways. At a certain point, I realized that even if my Uncle Pat and my Uncle Tom might not have approved, St. Patrick was, on my side, right? He was cheering me on. And so that was kind of a changing point for me. But I don't know where you'd like to go with this conversation.
Well, yeah. So basically what I'd like to do is kind of paint a picture for our listeners. We talked a little bit in the beginning of the program, just kind of gave a very brief overview, very, very brief, of Irish Christian history.
Yeah.
And some of these names, there is kind of an unfortunate part of all of this. And that is, we Orthodox Christians, and I think we Americans, and of course we have listeners from all over the world, but I'm speaking as an American also. I'm sad to say that St. Patrick's name has kind of been besmirched by the way in which St. Patrick's Day is celebrated in a secular sense in our country. And so I think Orthodoxy, certainly Catholicism has done that, but Orthodoxy needs to take up that mantle and hold high the name and the story of St. Patrick, because it's quite amazing how he was a slave and so forth. Anyway, my point is
missionary.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'd like to do is ask you first, before we kind of walk in these footsteps here, what led you to actually make this journey? It's kind of like you said, you tried to be a Russian, and, you really had to kind of be true to yourself and your own heritage. Yep. How is it that now, at this time in your life, did you finally make this trek to a very, very far land? And it was probably a pretty strenuous journey too, to go to all of these different places.
Yeah. Well, it was definitely that. It was a pilgrimage. It wasn't a pub crawl. It wasn't a vacation. It was a pilgrimage, and so it was strenuous, and that's a good thing. For Orthodox, that's a good thing. But honestly, the way that happened was, I found out about it. Our parish in Belfast was hosting this. There was so much interest in this pilgrimage that the registration closed in like 2 days. Boom! It was full up, and some very good friends got me a ticket, got me the ability to go on the pilgrimage, paid for the registration, for which I'm immensely grateful. And so, I couldn't have thought about such things by myself, but it was made available for me. So that seemed a very strong push. That's something I had desired for many years. People would always ask, so you've been to Ireland, right? Well, no, I haven't, right? But I finally could go. It was a great trip. I've just come back a little over a week ago. And so a lot is still kind of unsettled. I think I'm going to know better what happened in the future. But I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, let's start kind of, we talked about the reason why. We want to remind our listeners, we'd love to have your input in this. Maybe you have been to Ireland. Maybe you have gone to these holy sites. Maybe you are an Orthodox Christian of Irish heritage and you want to learn more. Or maybe you are a Roman Catholic and you want to know, why do we have this interest in Ireland? So please, we'd love to hear from you. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. So Father Michael, kind of take us to the cities that you went and the sort of the sites that you visited and what you did there.
Yep. Until rather recently, like past couple of hundred years, Ireland really didn't have cities so much. It was a very rural place. On medieval maps, sometimes the only two places marked in Ireland would be Clonmacnoise, which is about the center of Ireland, a huge monastic city, and St. Patrick's place of repentance up in Lough Derg in the north. So a lot of the places that I went were actually rural, often in the west. I'd like to, if I could, maybe start with St. Patrick and a little bit about what makes him so amazing. Great. There are all these sort of links, okay? A pious Serb, a pious Serbian person walks in the way of Saint Sava. He's sort of the national saint. He shows Serbian people what it means to be a Christian. Likewise, until very, very recently, pious Irishmen would speak of themselves as a son of Patrick. And even to this day in Irish, there's this sort of, comeuppance or whatever when people greet each other. You say in Irish, God be to you, and the person answers, God and Mary be to you. And if the first person wants to even up the ante, he'll say, God and Mary and Patrick. Like you can't get more than that, right? There was a bishop, as you mentioned, who came to Ireland before Patrick to minister to Christians already there. He never learned the Irish language. He didn't succeed. He basically went back to Gaul, to France. We don't know much at all about those communities. What we do know is, by contrast, Patrick stayed. And another kind of link between actually the Serbs and the Irish is that both of these were warlike cultures, but they received the gospel with no martyrdom. There were no early martyrs, who resisted the gospel, or or people who died for the sake of Christ.
Really?
At least, and there were a couple who were killed by another king who was a nominal Christian, but that's a different story. He was just a bad guy, but they weren't like made to sacrifice the way the Druids did or something.
And I was going to say they were largely in Ireland. They were largely Druids, correct? Sort of.
Yes. Yes.
In Ireland and Scotland, they were pagan Druids.
Yes, they were. This was a priestly caste. They were educated. They were wise. They were probably up to their eyeballs in demonic stuff as well. But they were really people to be dealt with. Patrick comes, and here's a link with the Georgian church. The Georgians are converted by a slave girl, Saint Nina. There's no power going on here. There's no army coming in and saying, you must be Christian. Likewise, Patrick is a slave. That's the way he first meets the Irish. Through a vision, he is led to escape. He gets training. He comes back to the very people that have enslaved him. He hears in a dream the voice of the Irish saying, come back and share your faith with us. And this man who has absolutely no clout, by the power of his holiness, changes Ireland. And
Amazing.
There are so many sites all over Ireland. He started off in the north, but there's so many sites all over Ireland that are associated with him. Some of that people probably just wanted to be associated with him. But there are a lot of places that are there's a lot of historical grounding for this. You mentioned the celebration of his feast day. One of the oldest and most important ways of celebrating St. Patrick's Day in Ireland happens in West Ireland, in County Mayo, which is where a lot of my own people come from. There's a mountain there called Croagh Patrick, or Patrick's Heap, Patrick's Mountain. It's probably the highest mountain in that area. And it was a holy place even under the Druids, or a sacred place, not holy necessarily. Right. So it's because of that Patrick climbs the mountain. He fasts there for 40 days and 40 nights. We don't know if he was keeping Lent, like Great Lent, or if this was his own Lent, and at the end of which he cast the snakes out of Ireland. And it's generally understood in the early texts what's meant by this is he's casting out the demons. He's consecrating Ireland to Christ. Since then...
Yeah, it's funny because when you read the secular accounts of this, they all want to jump on the bandwagon and say, well, there were no snakes there, or this is just an old wives' tale, but they're missing the greater point. Yeah, and that is when St. Patrick is pictured with these snakes, and there's this story of him driving out the snakes. Clearly, that means the demons. He is bringing the holiness of Christ and casting out the demonic worship among the Druids.
And Ireland is becoming secular the way a lot of places are. A pious Catholic friend of mine in Mayo has said to me, Father Michael, the snakes are back. Okay. So we gotta fight them, right? And with holiness. But so on St. Patrick's Day, thousands of people climb Croagh Patrick. And the main pilgrimage is the last Sunday of July. This year, because of COVID, Tuesday through Saturday of every week of July, there were pilgrims going up. So we, two friends of mine, Father Patrick and Brendan, we sound like a pub joke, we climbed Croagh Patrick. Right. And, I was 9 hours going up and down. I'm a very big guy. I'm slow. I didn't even make it to the top. My buddies did. But it's a big deal. But one thing that was really edifying about all of that was we're climbing. There were families climbing, fathers and sons, 3 generations of people to look by their faces. And there was such an atmosphere of mutual help. Some people climbed as far as they could. They knew they wouldn't make it to the top. But yet people were saying, good man, good job, keep going. It was really what we want to see in the church, right? We're all struggling, but we're struggling together. Yes. We each do what we can. Yes. I, fat guy that I am, I climbed a little over a half the way up, and I looked down. I was thinking about this, in fact, last Sunday when we were reading about Peter and walking on the water. I looked back down and I realized I'm looking at this enormous bay, hundreds of islands, several towns below me, and I realized, Michael, you can't do what you just did. I was very aware I had completely exceeded my own physical limitations.
That's wonderful.
I was getting help.
Indeed. And
yeah,
isn't that the idea, though, that you're going to this land, and I would like to do a show sometime about pilgrimages, because I think in the United States we don't have this tradition at all. Pilgrimage simply means you go to a monastery, but in the lands of our ancestors, that is in Jerusalem and Russia and Ireland and so forth, pilgrimage meant you walked for miles and miles and sang hymns and said prayers and stopped at holy sites. This is very, very common in Russia and Ukraine. You see hundreds of thousands of people making these pilgrimages. So you're giving us a wonderful sense of, we're walking in the footsteps of others who have gone before us to commemorate the works of St. Patrick. What is the significance, though, of this mountain? Why do they call it Croagh-Patrick?
Because it's associated with him, and which it wasn't always. It used to be called something else. But once he does his exploit, once he goes there and prays and fasts and repents on behalf of the people who put him into slavery, right? Once he does that, the island is the mountain is always associated with him.
I see.
Another thing that we find associated with the saints all over Ireland, and again, not just Ireland, you can find these things from Ireland all the way to Russia, are holy wells. People knew where the good water was, even in pagan times. You don't want to get sick from drinking. They knew where the good water was. And sociologists say that, oh, yes, these were used by pagans and they're given over to Christian use. We would say, as Christians, that God put them there so people would begin to associate good things, blessings, healings with water, and so ultimately with baptism. Patrick systematically goes around Ireland baptizing his new converts in these wells. And many of them are still associated with his name. But they're wells dedicated to pretty much every saint, every Irish saint, the local saints especially, the ones we've never heard of, and whose names we probably can't pronounce even,
Yeah, I noticed that. When I was reading up on the Irish saints, I didn't even want to try to include them because I couldn't pronounce them.
That's right. Half the letters are silent, telling you how to pronounce the other letters, and it's really quite something. Anyway, but for instance, one of our most wonderful experiences, we had three guys. We arrived in Ireland a week before this formal pilgrimage, which was led by our diocese, went across Ireland for a week. So we were there a week. We were with this larger group a week. The first week, about Wednesday, I think it was, of that week, we went to St. Ita's well, sometimes pronounced Ita, or there's an old-fashioned named Ida. It's the same name. The Irish had a strong identity in clans, not just the mother, father, 2.5 children kind of family that we have nowadays, but the larger family, the cousins, the uncles, the aunts, everybody. And so kids would regularly be fostered by their uncles, by their cousins, so that this idea of the clan would always be strengthened. You know who your parents were, but you'd also have a very strong relationship with your uncle. But so this was already in place when Christianity comes, and then people start fostering their kids, not just to their uncles and aunts, but to these nuns especially, who were often educated women. They had all these maternal instincts, but no children. They would educate the kids. They would raise them in piety and educate them in all sorts of ways. St. Ida was famous for this, and she's even called the godmother or the foster mother of saints in the plural.
Right.
Of saints.
Right. Saint Brendan. I'm reading it here. Saint Brendan, Saint Pulcherius. It's amazing.
And St. Brendan is the most famous. So we went near Tralee, the middle of nowhere, this little well, St. Ida's Well, and we had liturgy there on this medieval altar in this little field.
That's incredible.
It was a real welcome to Ireland, because we walked in, totally blue skies, two little white puffy clouds far away in the distance, a perfect day. We started the liturgy out under God's blue sky. By the time we ended the liturgy, it had rained 4 times. Once a real deluge and once with hail. But it was one of the most glorious liturgies I've ever had in my life. And I felt, not to get too mystical or weird, but I felt if I stood there a little longer, my feet would have grown into the ground. I felt so connected, not just with the faith, it was the same liturgy I always celebrate, but with that place, with these people. It was a sense of homecoming. St. Ida is buried there, and the well is really magnificent. Our friend Brendan, whose patron saint was baptized in that well, had wanted to be baptized himself there, kind of to jump in the water. Fortunately for us, we were going to do the same thing. Fortunately for us, the water was very shallow. Otherwise, 15 minutes after liturgy was over, 2 pious Roman Catholic middle-aged ladies would have been met with like 3 naked druids or something. That would have been very shocking for them. So thank God we did not do that, Right. But it was a wonderful liturgy, and it kind of set a tone for many, many other things. A lot of the holy places are still rural, so they take some finding, but some pious person has put up a whole lot of them on Google Ireland. So you can find the coordinates and find the road that's closest to it, et cetera.
I'm looking at what's amazing when you're saying this is that you served the divine liturgy at this well of this woman that died in the mid to late 6th century.
6th century, right.
Yeah,
yes.
She died in 570. She was born in 480. And by the way, it also says that this well has been known to heal smallpox in children and other diseases. Yeah. So it's kind of a place where you bring children to be healed. What an amazing! That just gave me goosebumps.
That's exactly the right way to say it. Where you bring, present tense. One thing we saw, and I would say, I was only in Ireland like 2.5 weeks, but the Catholic Church institutionally is really embattled in Ireland, and we don't need to go into that. But personal piety is still a very real thing, and a lot of lay people. So this well was a good introduction to all of that. There's a little chapel. Lord knows how long it's been there, because the entrance is so low. This is like for short little medieval Irish peasant people, right? So even I had to kind of bend my neck a little bit to get in. There's no room even for an altar in the chapel, but there's a shelf all around that was covered with little candles, rosaries, handwritten prayers, pictures of departed loved ones. Another very typically Irish form of devotion that's very ancient is that people will tie little cloths to trees when they make a prayer. It's just sort of an offering of some kind. And so there were a couple of sort of bushes there that were covered with these little things, almost like Christmas trees in a certain way. And that custom evidently began with St. Bridget, but it's quite common all over. We saw it at all the holy wells.
Incredible. So here's what we want to do, Father Michael. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we do have a caller online, so we're going ask the caller's question. But we want to remind everybody, if you'd like to call in, ask questions about the Irish Saints, or have a comment about our veneration of the Irish Saints, about the land of Ireland, we have Father Michael Carney on the phone. And we would love to hear from you. 1-855-AF-RADIO. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
Hi, this is John Maddox. You know, when you support Ancient Faith Radio, you're not only helping to make this ministry possible for you, but also for people like Bryce in Australia.
I'd firstly just like to say that I love your show and what you do. It means a lot to all of us listening. I'm down in Australia, and over here, Orthodoxy is basically unheard of. I'm not Orthodox. I was raised into an evangelical Protestant family. However, from a gradual exposure and desire to learn more about Orthodoxy, I've come to agree and see truth in pretty much everything the Church teaches. The nearest English-speaking Orthodox church is several hours away, and I feel all alone in my pursuit of the faith here. Currently, my only exposure to Orthodoxy is through Ancient Faith Radio and my friend. How should I introduce the idea that I may be inquiring into Orthodoxy to my parents? Thanks again, Bryce.
Would you consider a donation to AFR right now? You can do so on our app or go to our website at ancientfaith.com/support. Ancient Faith Radio, here for you and for people all over the world.
We're back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
Welcome back. We're talking with Father Michael Carney about his pilgrimage to the land of Ireland, the ancient Christian sites in Ireland. Father Michael, we have a caller, Carolyn from Jersey City. Carolyn, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Lord have mercy.
This must be somebody you know.
I
Hello,
think it
Father
might be.
Michael.
I think it might be.
This is another Carney.
How did you hear about this? This is my sister.
Oh, that's wonderful. Carolyn, thank you for calling.
To the end. Hold your comments to the end.
Absolutely.
We'll get the juicy info about Father Michael later.
Juicy,
but
yes, well,
what
and
can
there
you?
Is lots of that, sure. Well, I also visited Ireland and attempted to go up Croagh Patrick, but I was not wearing proper shoes, and I couldn't finish. So I know all about that. But Michael, Father Michael, I should say, I could see you on the mountain, and it was such a delightful picture. So thank you for sharing that. I know we'll have more to share. I don't want to take over the whole show, but my question is...
I love that you called.
My question where did you put that money you stole from me when I was in 7th grade?
No, my question is, what there's such a, I know that in your church there's such a rich heritage of the faithful and of saints. So what do you think that from the experience that you had in Ireland, what do people like St. Patrick and St. Brendan and Aida, what do they have to say to us today? How does their faith challenge us today?
Yes.
Yeah.
What an amazing question.
Let me speak about St. Brendan for just a minute. Now, a lot of the Irish monks had this tremendous, maybe you call this wanderlust, maybe it was a missionary fervor, maybe a little both. And so there are like Irish crosses on Valam in northwestern Russia. Like, how did that get there? We have no idea who brought it. But there are Irish missionary monks all over Europe. They helped re-Christianize Europe. But the greatest example of these wanderers is St. Brendan. And there's a famous story. They call him Brendan the Navigator. There's a famous story. It exists in various ways of his wanderings with his disciples, and they go off in a boat. And we actually were in Dingle where they left from, etc. There's a Mount Brendan near there, and they go off looking really for God, basically. And there are all sorts of really, bells and whistles kind of addition to the story. And I always thought, this is just the ultimate Irish tall tale, right? You're sitting around the campfire at night, you tell these stories. Yeah. There is a wonderful Romanian monk, and look, Carolyn, for Father Seraphim Aldea, Aldea. He studied in England, and he fell in love with these Celtic saints he'd never heard of. And he has a wonderful little 15-minute program on YouTube about St. Brendan, which changed my appreciation of him and made it much deeper. He says about Brendan, I mentioned that, St. Brendan was the foster son of Ida. He is baptized by St. Erc, isn't that a great name, who was a Druid, becomes a bishop, baptized by St. Patrick himself. So he's formed by one saint, he's baptized by another saint, but he is not in anybody's school. He's not some sort of clone of it. He's not a cookie-cutter repeat of anybody else. He is defined by Christ and by deep, deep freedom. And Father Seraphim says, and I think this is really important, he says, he can have this freedom because he is deeply traditional and he has internalized the tradition. So it isn't outside of him, it's in him, and it's guiding him. He's got his own little kind of Christian gyroscope going, that keeps him on track. So someone like Brendan is, I really haven't thought of him the same way since then. This real image of a holy restlessness, never settling, never just assuming, I'm okay with God, I have arrived. There's always something more. And not because you don't have anything, but because you've met this God whom you love intensely, and you realize how deeply he loves you, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the saints. And a lot of these Irish saints, they're real characters. I wouldn't know if I want them in my parish.
That's shocking to me. I mean, that's just shocking.
Right. So one more proof that they're Orthodox, right? They're all these, strange characters. But I think one thing, what else should I say? A lot of these saints,
I was just gonna I was gonna add, Carolyn, my own thought here, if you don't mind, and that is, one of the things that we can learn. Father Michael had alluded to this before, and that is Ireland, like pretty much the rest of the Western world, including our own United States, is becoming much more secular very quickly. And not only secular, but there is a way of looking at it as a kind of paganism, right? I mean, there's a paganism of materiality, where we're worshiping the idol of money and sex and whatever it is, pleasure. And, maybe we can also learn from St. Patrick, who drives out the snakes, that is the demons, and all of the druids that were there, and how does he proclaim the gospel to a people that this is totally foreign to them. I think that's where we are today. Again, we can't assume that people understand Christ or the gospel or the church or the saints or holiness. I think we sort of have to start over. Just my 2 cents. Go ahead, Father Michael.
If I one thing, I'll kind of riff on that a little bit. There's another kind of paganism which is also very, very popular. And before I talk about that a little bit, I'd like to remind myself and listeners of the words of a remarkable woman whom I knew. She was an evangelical, but she used to say that the worldview of primitive people had much more in common with the worldview of early Christians than the worldview of early Christians has with modern rationalistic
Indeed.
Christianity, right? Now, the mistake the pagans made was they would see the world as kind of translucent. You know, there's light coming through the world. They experience God through the world. So they say, the sun must be God, right?
Right.
I mean, the scriptures answer this. You know, I lift my eyes to the mountains, from whence cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. So nowadays there is this rediscovery of a lot of early Celtic texts, of Irish texts, and other like the Scots, the Welsh. And it is so different from the kind of hyper-rational stuff that often passes for spirituality among many Christians, that the New Agers say, you see, this was a different kind of Christianity entirely. They're right about that, but they're wrong when they say it's really sort of half pagan and like Wicca is really, et cetera, et cetera. This is not true. And in fact, the early saints are deliberately fighting any kind of syncretism. Perhaps the most well-known prayer from the early Celtic church, the early Irish church, is the breastplate of St. Patrick.
Oh, St. Patrick, right.
If I can put in a plug, if anyone wants it,
Please.
I've written it out as a trifold folder. And if you write to village priest, as if that were one word, villagepriest@gmail, ask for the breastplate, and I'll send it to you free. It's a wonderful prayer for daily use. I know people who use it every day. And it speaks about these natural forces as being kind of servants of God, the way the angels are, the way we should be. So there's that whole kind of neo-pagan misreading that's very popular.
Yeah.
And we mustn't mistake that for the real Celtic Christianity.
Yeah. Just before I got on, a friend of mine texted me. I'm leaving on a trip tomorrow, and she texted me, a part of St. Patrick's breastplate to protect me in my journey. And I texted her back, and I said, "You wouldn't believe this. I'm listening to my brother on a radio show talking about his trip to Ireland, and he's talking about St. Patrick
very soon. I'll send you the check." Yes,
Carolyn.
Yes,
Carolyn.
It's well known to me. I should go, but
I was just going to say, I thank you very, very much for this call. Actually, it was a wonderful question and very insightful, and wish you all the best in your trip. But I do want you to know how proud we are of your brother. You know, I've had a long history with him for almost 40 years, and how much we love him and how much of a wonderful, tremendous priest he is. And I hope you're as proud of him as we are.
Yeah, well, thank you. But get in line, because I've been proud of him for a lot longer.
Good for you. All right. Thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate it. God bless you.
Okay, thanks. I love you, Michael. All right.
Love you too. Bye-bye.
All right. 1-855-AF Radio. If you love Father Michael, feel free to call in. And even if you don't know him, call in, and we'd love to hear from you. So, Father Michael, we talked about your first city that you went to and how you served the Divine Liturgy there. I did want to kind of ask you also. Now, this is maybe a little bit more touchy, because I obviously don't want to talk about Catholicism, and there's obviously a 1,000-year history there. But, you know, is there a kind of understanding of Orthodoxy at all? Because my sense of things is that Catholicism is extremely strong, and of course Protestantism in the north there. What, you know, is Orthodoxy even on the map, or is it really just kind of like an ethnic thing? Are people coming to the Orthodox faith because they see this kind of connection with the ancient church? What's the situation with Orthodoxy there? Before we get back to your trip, I'm interested in that. I
remember a priest in West Virginia saying to me that that he knew that they were making progress because there's a nearby fundamentalist pastor who had to give an anti-Catholic sermon once a month, and now on alternate months he was preaching about the Orthodox. Okay, well, I don't think we've come up to that level in Ireland to meet with like official disapproval yet, not like on the parish level. We're just not known. Now, Orthodoxy is the first or the second largest growing faith in Ireland, but that is largely through immigration and mainly Romanian immigration. There are several Romanian parishes. I was at two parishes, and I met a priest from another parish. All of them were a little different. All of them were very small, very, very small. The Belfast example gives the kind of the broadest leap in a certain way, in that they're all native Irish. And there's a really nice guy on our pilgrimage who is an Orangeman, an Ulster Protestant, and he's there in the Orthodox parish. And there's a young fellow in that parish who's an Irish nationalist, and he's in that parish. And so they both have to kind of adjust their ways of thinking, right?
I never thought about that, but that's kind of Orthodoxy doesn't have a dog in that fight, right?
Right.
Between the Catholics and the Protestants. So maybe that's a wonderful place where, as the scriptures even say, broken down, Christ has broken down the middle wall of partition, between the Jews and the Greeks, and maybe Orthodoxy can witness to that.
That's a very, very good return to the scriptures about all of this, to a really objective truth. I remember when I'm not quite that old, when the Russian immigrants came to Paris in the 1920s, they kind of sized up the situation. They said, the Protestants and Catholics have basically beat each other into a pulp, and they can't make any further progress. They're totally polarized and can't move forward. And here comes Orthodoxy. We can show them another way, which is deeper and older and it's got the best of both because it's older than both. And some of the pastors and some of the people I've met over in Ireland had this approach. And they're very small, but so in fact were the first foundations of Christianity in Ireland and probably pretty much every other country. So, so a lot of the parishes are ethnic kind of halfway houses, right? But the ones I've heard about are welcoming to Irish people. One of the priests I met in Dublin is a native Irish speaker, and his parish is pretty much all native Irish people. But I think like our parishes here in this country, the makeup is the local folks, whatever they are, Greek and Ukrainian and convert and this and that, right? But we're growing. There's a little monastery there now, which is under the Romanians, which is not a surprise. They've got the infrastructure. Two very lively, charitable nuns. And what's important also is that they're right near Clonmacnoise, which is this central monastery. We talk about the island of saints and scholars. That's Clonmacnoise. It was this huge monastic city at a certain point. Well, they're like 5 miles away from it or something. This little place, they bought it from a Roman Catholic convent that kind of went belly up. And there they are. I didn't notice it. I served liturgy there for them and for our pilgrim group. It was wonderful. And I didn't really notice till afterwards that there are all these saints up on the iconostasis. I thought I was just looking at Romanian, but I looked closer, and in Irish, there are the names of these local saints.
Wow,
Saint Enda,
that's wonderful.
Who's like the father of monasticism on the Aran Islands, Saint Brendan, Saint Ciaran, all these local saints.
I love
so
it.
They clearly have... They're just laying it out on the table. This is why we're here.
I love it.
Not to remind you of Romania, but to be here.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And it's a witness to what those early Irish saints at least did. 1-855-AF Radio. Would love to hear from you in the last 10 minutes of the program. Father Michael, so we kind of, we were going, in a certain direction there about your trip. And just to remind everybody, you had taken this trip to Ireland. It was a pilgrimage. And you were going to walk in the places where these saints were. And you talked about the first city that you went to. You walked up this mountain with the Croagh Patrick, and then you also had the opportunity to serve liturgy. What other places did you go to to walk in the footsteps of these Irish saints?
Okay, so southeastern Ireland. We were at St. Declan's Monastery. St. Declan arrives in Ireland before Patrick, and he's much more a kind of a classic monk. He wants to be worshiping God. He wants to become holy, And of course, people find him and they gravitate to him. But he's not a bishop like Patrick, and there's even kind of something of a tradition that there might have been rivalry. He might have felt a little slighted, like, here I am, like, praying for 18 hours a day, and this guy's, turning over Ireland. But maybe Patrick turned over Ireland because of Declan's prayers. We have no way of knowing. But in any case, he's there. He's praying. People gravitate to him. Ultimately, as so often happens, he kind of spirits himself away towards the end of his life and establishes this little hermitage far away so that he can just be again with God by himself. But we saw his church. We were there in his church. We were with Bishop Irenae, who was a really inspiring hierarch, And so he led us.
That's
we
wonderful.
Always had some sort of service every place we went, often leading to a feeling we were really being welcomed by the saints. So at St. Declan's, who did we meet? And so we're learning the history of it. There was this remarkable guy who's a retired professor, and he just likes to hang out and introduce visitors to this saint that he really loves. Remarkable guy, and he's telling us all the wars about this place. And we see that there's this very, very early kind of shrine inside the church. Who is this for? This is for someone whose name I can't remember, who is a fool for Christ. He didn't use that expression, but he's describing him, that he really was kind of acting kind of goofy and strange, but people recognized he was from God, and he prophesied the future sometimes and healed people. I'm thinking, I know this story. I've heard about people like this, So this is not so much remembered in the Christian West. There are examples of holy fools, but they're not so much remembered. But here's an example. So there was St. Declan's Monastery. We went also to his hermitage and to his spring, which again is associated with healings of various kinds.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm looking at pictures of this monastery. It is very ancient. I mean,
it's really old.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of these were blown up by the Protestants later on, that sort of thing. But they're still there. And so that's really very, very impressive. And St. Declan's Monastery we went to St. Sennon's Island. Sometimes called Shannon. The river Shannon is probably named after him. And that was also very moving. He was, again, an eremitical saint, then became a bishop. The Irish church was very monastic, and often the abbots were also bishops. There were, at one point, like 300 bishops in the Irish church. There are only 200 and some bishops in the Russian church now. And the Russian church has more bishops than all the other Orthodox churches put together. 300 bishops in Ireland, probably because each clan wanted to have their own. You wouldn't go with the O'Neills if you were an O'Brady, right? You have your own. You have to have your own. So St. Sennan was a bishop, and so there's this whole little monastic city, and it's kind of at the estuary, the kind of the mouth of the Shannon, and it's a little island. But you're looking around, and there's no mountains, there's no place to hide. And so these places were absolutely defenseless when the Viking raids started coming.
Wow.
I'm leaving out probably the most important one, which is Skellig Michael. Please look it up, folks. Skellig, Skellig, and then Michael, the name of the archangel. One of the earliest monastic sites off the southwest coast of Ireland, off of Kerry. There was a monastery there for 600 years. It was extremely primitive conditions. Very, very small community. Probably it couldn't have had more than about 20, 24, if only because they wouldn't have been able to feed them. There's no source of wood on the island.
So this is a little island. It's just a little island off of Ireland. Okay.
And in fact, Skellig evidently does not even mean island. Inish means island. Skellig is like a heap of rocks. It's
I mean, you can see a picture of it on the internet.
Yes.
It's just like a mountain sticking up out of
in the middle of nothing. Yes.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. And for 600 years, there were monks there. And so it's what we would call probably nowadays a skeet, right?
Yeah,
and they were only interested really in coming to know God. And so they were so uninterested in leaving any kind of records. We don't even know the names of them. But if it was like most monasteries, half the time it was an open-air mental institution, and half the time people were like walking on air, right? There's undoubtedly great holiness in that place. Skellig Michael is famous now because it featured in a Star Wars movie. And so there are all sorts of people totally clueless who go there and yet are aware, many of them, there's something about this place. They're not, communing with Luke Skywalker, a character from fiction. They're touching something that's still there. And when we went there, it was quite evident that there was still this place had been sort of imbued with holiness.
Amazing.
Right?
Father Michael, we've come to the end of our hour, and I really appreciate you sharing all of this. Just to kind of sum up and tie the bow on this, looking back at your trip, obviously you had already said that, you were very glad that you did it. What is one takeaway that you came home with from this trip that you will be able to use in your ministry and share with people? What is it that you learned that you feel is maybe somehow something that you didn't have before you went there, and now you've brought that back with you?
Yeah, it confirmed a lot of things. Hard to identify one. It confirmed in me that the faith that I am in is the faith these saints shared. It confirmed in me and renewed in me the sense that effort is worth it, that effort opens me up to the grace that God always wants to give me. It confirmed in me a sense and gave me a whole new depth of knowledge that God is very close, that there are millions of ways he wants to communicate himself to us. May I close with a toast? It's a very Irish way of closing.
I love
time?
it. I'll raise a glass here.
This is one of the oldest toasts in Ireland, and it probably was originally used as a sort of a zapivka after liturgy.
Amazing.
So it's three toasts. Health to the handsome man who stretched out his arms on the cross, and health to the courteous woman who had a son by the Holy Spirit, and health to Patrick, who blessed Ireland. Sláinte.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much, Father Michael.
Thank you.
What a great ending to a wonderful conversation. Thank you for sharing that experience with us. And who knows, maybe you're going to organize another trip to Ireland, and you can we can have more people join you. I think that would be a wonderful thing, and I might join you too. All right, Father Michael Carney, Thank you very, very much. God bless you. Appreciate your contribution tonight. Thank you. Before I share a few final thoughts, I want to offer my sincere thank you to Father Michael Carney for joining us tonight. Also for his sister, Carolyn. How cute that was that she called in. Thanks to John Maddox for engineering the program, for everybody that listened in, and for those who asked questions. Here's a few final thoughts. I wanted to read to you this Kontakion of St. Patrick of Ireland. Father Michael had alluded to this in his toast at the end there. And we highly venerate as Orthodox Christians St. Patrick. It says, "From slavery, you escaped to freedom in Christ's service. He sent you to deliver Ireland from the devil's bondage. You planted the word of God in pagan hearts. In your journeys and hardships, you rivaled the Apostle Paul. Having received the reward for your labors in heaven, never cease to pray for the flock you have gathered on earth, Holy Bishop Patrick." And that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. Join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today. Good night, everybody.
Glory to Jesus Christ. Glory forever. You're listening to AncientFaithRadio.com.
A wonderful new tool for Orthodox children. A Child's Guide to the Divine Liturgy is designed as an aid to help children negotiate their way through the Divine Liturgy and learn more about the Church and our faith.
We outlined sort of the major markers of the service, and we wrote it and illustrated so that the child would then remain engaged with the liturgy, so that attention of the child would be moving forward towards the altar, not necessarily down at the book. We didn't want them reading about things. We wanted them experiencing it.
To find this and other books like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Ancient Faith Radio presents Readings from Under the Grapevine with Dr. Chrissy Hart. Dr. Hart is an author and licensed psychologist from York, Pennsylvania. Our program features readings from Orthodox Christian books and other classic literature. So now, without any further delay, here's Dr. Chrissy Hart with Readings from Under the Grapevine.
Righteous Esther, from My Holy Queens and Princesses by Dionysius and Egle Egaderini Potamaitis, illustrated by Egle Egaderini Potamaitis, published by Potamaitis Publishing. Righteous Esther, the Beauty of Persia. These events took place when Xerxes ruled from his palace in Susa over the vast lands from India to Egypt. One day he called all his noblemen, his generals, and his governors to a great feast. The banquet was held in an exquisite indoor garden, lavishly decorated with colorful curtains. It lasted for 7 days. The guests ate and drank from golden goblets, sitting on gilded couches, praising their mighty ruler, the king. At the end of the feast, Xerxes, being in a very good mood, wanted to show to his guests his beautiful queen Vashti.